Some moments happen in silence, yet they shake an entire room. That evening at Kingsley, the most luxurious restaurant in Manhattan, the clinking of silverware abruptly halted at the exact moment the piano began to hum a gentle jazz tune. Every gaze turned to a single point, not the chandelier, not the table of power brokers, but the space between two rows of chairs where a trembling young boy stood up. Jaden Carter, 10 years old, disabled in both legs, steel braces wrapped around his knees, reached out his hand not toward anyone in his family, but toward Ava Thompson. A 20-year-old black woman, the youngest waitress at the restaurant, had just set down a dessert plate when she froze. In those few short seconds, all social rules, racial constructs, and unspoken etiquette seemed to hold their breath collectively. The boy said nothing. He just extended his hand. Ava looked down, a small, pale hand trembling from fear but still trying to remain extended in offering. She looked up. The boy's face shimmered with the most fragile human expression, one that adults often overlook: hope. From afar, a cold voice rang out, "Sir, control your son. This is a restaurant, not a dance floor. Staff aren't obligated to entertain." Nathaniel Carter, the boy's father, founder of Carter Equity, a Wall Street magnate, froze. He had never been reprimanded in public, never felt so uncertain, and hadn't dared let Jaden leave the house since the accident. One mistake on the highway had left his son's legs forever changed. He lowered his voice to scold his child, "Jaden, sit down." No one said another word. No one moved. Everyone waited to see what the black waitress would do in the face of wealth and implied threat. Ava didn't speak. She untied her apron, folded it carefully, set it on the tray slowly as if closing a chapter of life lived in silent submission. Then she turned back and took Jaden's hand. "You know, I can't dance while still wearing my apron." A whisper, a sigh. A wine glass paused mid-air. Nathaniel leapt to his feet. "What do you think you're doing?" Ava looked him straight in the eyes. No bowing, no obedient smile. "I'm just accepting an invitation, sir." No one had time to intervene. The boy had already taken his first step, one leg dragging, the other shaking violently. The steel braces screeched harshly against the wooden floor grating. But Ava didn't pull him, didn't lead. She simply moved in rhythm, slowly, unevenly. But it was his rhythm. At a nearby table, a woman whispered, "She's going to lose her job tomorrow." Nathaniel said nothing. But in his eyes, for the first time in 2 long detached years, a memory stirred. Elizabeth, his late wife, had once said, "Dancing isn't about perfection, it's about connection." And now, under hundreds of watching eyes within a world of decorum and expectation, a boy was no longer being led. He was leading. There was no grand music, no applause, only the sound of metal braces lightly tapping the wood floor, and a boy struggling to stay balanced while guiding an adult to follow his pace. 3 steps, slow but steady. Ava didn't adjust Jaden's posture. She gave no signals, no corrections. She held his hand with just enough pressure to offer trust, not control. Nathaniel Carter sat motionless. He looked at his son, but this time not as a child who needed to be treated, but as an individual who was leading. And in those small eyes, something began to shift. Fear gave way to focus. Shame transformed into a fragile sense of pride. And the weak little boy he had once feared for was now creating his own rhythm. He recalled Elizabeth's gaze, the woman who once held Jaden's hand as he learned to walk across the living room carpet, who smiled every time he stumbled. "It doesn't need to be perfect, Nathaniel. He needs to feel like he owns this body." That memory now collided violently with the present. Not in the living room, not under their roof, but in the middle of a luxurious restaurant, a place that had never made room for missteps or mercy. A soft cough broke his thoughts. Mr. Beckett, the restaurant manager, approached quietly, but with calculated intent. His voice was polite to the point of being chilling. "Mr. Carter, I assure you this will not happen again. The staff member will be formally disciplined according to our standards." His eyes landed on Ava like a verdict already written. Nathaniel still hadn't responded. He couldn't, not because he lacked words, but in his mind Jaden's soft laugh when he coaxed Ava into one more step kept echoing, drowning out everything else. In that room filled with power and prestige, only one small smile felt real. Ava bowed slightly, gently, guiding Jaden back to the table, not saying unnecessary words. When she helped him into his seat, she did so with the grace of a dancer concluding an opening act. "Thank you for inviting me." It was an honor. She turned away, not hurried. And as Ava passed Nathaniel's table, he suddenly spoke. "Wait." Ava stopped. His voice sounded different. Not that of a CEO, not that of a father afraid of embarrassment, but of a man seeing something for the first time. "What's your full name?" Ava turned back, stood tall, eyes fearless. "Ava Thompson, sir." Nathaniel nodded, slowly, the kind of nod that tries to remember or tries to understand. Then he reached into the inner pocket of his blazer, pulled out a business card and held it out to her. "My office. 10 a.m. tomorrow." No one said a word. No silverware moved. All of Kingsley held its breath. Ava took the card. No thank you, no bow. Jaden looked at his father at the table, his eyes still glimmering from the moment he danced. His voice floated like a breeze. "Why did you do that, Dad?" The question fell onto the table like a pebble in still water. Small, but it sent ripples and no one could stop. Nathaniel Carter didn't answer, not because he didn't have one, but because, for the first time in his life, he was forced to confront what he'd been avoiding for 2 years, that his son didn't need a plan. He needed to be seen. The next morning, as Ava Thompson stepped into the grand lobby of Carter Tower, she immediately realized she didn't belong here. Every surface gleamed. Every footstep was deliberate. Women wore tailored suits with precision cuts. Men flaunted expensive watches as if they were badges of personal worth. Ava clutched the strap of her old handbag, unease rising in her chest. Her blue dress was the cheapest item from a clearance rack, and her shoes had been glued back together more than once. Still, she held her head high. She wasn't here to impress. She was here because she had been invited for a reason she hadn't yet dared to name. "I have an appointment with Mr. Carter," Ava said firmly, her voice steady. The receptionist looked her over from head to toe, as if scanning a misplaced item, then picked up the phone. After a moment, she hung up and pursed her lips. "18th floor. Ms. Reynolds will receive you." Ava stared at her reflection in the stainless steel walls as the elevator ascended. A 20-year-old black girl stepping into the heart of a financial empire just because she had dared to dance with a billionaire's son. But what Ava never revealed was the fire that quietly burned within her. The fire from years of working 3 jobs at once, waitressing in the morning, selling used books on weekends, and tutoring children with disabilities at night at a community center she and her sister had built from nothing. They called it Freedom Steps, Steps of Freedom, where no one had to ask permission to move to their rhythm. On the 18th floor, Ava was led down a long corridor glimmering with mirrors. People looked up as she passed. No one spoke, but their stares were enough to paint an entire silent indictment. A woman of color, dressed, walking through the executive wing, it was enough to stir curiosity. Ms. Reynolds, who escorted Ava, was a woman in her 40s, with her hair pinned tightly and her posture rigid. They hadn't walked far when she dropped a remark laced with apparent disdain. "He fired you, didn't he? Happens all the time. Powerful clients complain, and people like you lose their jobs. It's routine." Then she gave a cold chuckle and adjusted her glasses. "I mean, people like you, staff who don't know their place." Ava didn't get angry, didn't bite back. She smiled, a light, effortless smile that pushed back against the harshest prejudice. "And where exactly is that place, in your opinion?" The question hung in the cold hallway. Reynolds didn't have time to answer. Her phone rang. "He'll see you now." Nathaniel Carter's office took up half the floor, its floor-to-ceiling windows so vast it felt like he could oversee all of Manhattan with a glance. When Ava stepped inside, he stood with his back turned, gazing at the city like he was contemplating a deal the world hadn't heard about yet. "Good morning, Ms. Thompson," he said, not turning around. His voice was low, calculated to the syllable. "Thank you for coming." He gestured toward the chair across from his desk. Ava sat down, eyes steady, unflinching. She immediately recognized his tactic, a calculated silence meant to make the other party reveal themselves first. Finally he spoke. "Are you educated?" Ava tilted her head. "You mean formally, I mean college." "Degree." "Major." Ava replied plainly. "I studied child development at NYU. Haven't completed my master's in special education yet." A flicker crossed his expression of surprise, perhaps. Then he continued, "But you're waitressing." "I work 3 jobs, actually," Ava replied without blinking. "Nights at the restaurant, weekends at a used bookshop, and tutoring children with special needs when I can." Nathaniel walked to the desk and placed a thick folder before her. "I've done my research on you, Ava Thompson. I wanted to understand. The woman who dared to dance with my son." He opened the folder inside, where photos of a worn-down Little Center Freedom steps were. "You founded this with your sister, correct?" "Yes. Imani and I, a dance program for children with disabilities." He flipped through some financial statements. "About to shut down due to lack of funding." Ava wasn't surprised. Of course he knew. Of course he would have someone investigate everything overnight. Still, she remained composed. "I'm not here to ask for money, Mr. Carter. I came because you invited me." Nathaniel let out a weighted laugh. "Fair enough." Then he stood up, his expression shifting into something unreadable. "I want to offer you a job." Ava furrowed her brows. "You mean, as a waitress in your house?" "No," Nathaniel said, his face firming. "As a therapeutic companion for Jaden." The room thickened with silence for a few seconds. Ava looked into the eyes of the powerful man before her, and what she saw wasn't arrogance, but confusion, disorientation. "I've hired the best experts, physical therapists, neurologists, psychologists. But what you did yesterday, even if it was just a dance, was the first time. I've seen him smile since the accident." He swallowed, quietly, but genuinely. Ava stood up, decisively. "No." Nathaniel froze as if no was a word he had never heard before. Ava continued calmly. "I don't work for people who see race and class before they see competence. And I don't work for those who believe emotional healing can be bought." She strolled toward the door, returned and placed a business card on his desk. "Freedom Steps classes every Tuesday and Thursday, 4 p.m. If you want to bring Jaden, the first session is free." And then she left. Light is the final step in a finished dance. But in Nathaniel Carter's heart, that was the moment the real battle began. The door closed behind Ava, leaving Nathaniel with the open folder on his desk. Inside were photos of disabled children dancing dry financial statements, and one detail he couldn't shake. His son's smile, which had been missing for 2 years, suddenly returned because of a 20-year-old Earl. He picked up the business card Ava had left behind, a thin piece of paper bearing the address of a run-down community center in the Bronx. Beneath the words "Freedom Steps" was a handwritten tagline, "No need to lead, just walk alongside." He read it once, then again, and still couldn't explain why his chest tightened. It was a feeling he had never experienced in billion-dollar deals, being refused. With poise. The next day at 3:55 p.m., a black Bentley pulled up in front of the Freedom Steps Center. The door didn't open. The headlights stayed on. Inside, Nathaniel Carter sat still, his hands on the steering wheel as if wrestling with himself. In the back seat, Jaden Carter sat silently gazing out the window, his eyes glowing with a strange mix of anticipation and excitement Nathaniel hadn't seen in a long time. Jaden shifted one foot slightly, adjusting his brace. Then, without warning, he pushed open the car door. "Where are you going?" Nathaniel asked, his voice sharp by instinct. "To class," Jaden said, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. Nathaniel watched as his son stepped out, limping but steady, and then, for some reason, he opened his door and followed. He saw Ava standing at the modest reception desk, chatting with a black woman wearing a long-sleeved blouse and a hijab, likely her sister. When Ava spotted Jaden, she smiled, not the practiced smile of customer service, but something tangible like seeing a familiar traveler again on a long road. She didn't ask why they were there. She didn't shake hands. She tilted her head and said, "Class starts in 3 minutes. You ready, Jaden?" The boy nodded. Then he turned to his father for the first time in his life to ask for permission. Nathaniel nodded back reluctantly. "Go ahead. I'll wait here." Ava led Jaden inside, leaving Nathaniel with peeling paint and rows of old wooden benches in a hallway. A place that looked nothing like the world he knew, yet made him feel lighter. Imani, Ava's sister, handed Nathaniel a paper cup of water. "The first day is always the hardest," she said, eyes sharp but not judgmental. "For the parents, not the kids." "You're mistaken," Nathaniel replied softly. "I'm not here to switch therapy programs. I've hired the best doctors." Imani nodded as if that were nothing new. "And how's that worked out for Jaden?" The question was simple, not accusatory, but it struck straight at the blind spot Nathaniel had long avoided. The classroom door creaked open. An older woman walked in with a cane, her silver hair neatly braided, her white blouse crisp, her eyes bright with knowledge and lived experience. Imani whispered to Patrice Hill, former head of neurology at Harvard. "She's volunteering here now." Nathaniel was stunned. "I rejected her research proposal 3 times. His hand holding the water cup trembled slightly. Dr. Hill saw him. Her gaze held no resentment, only a chilling clarity. "We're studying the neurological impact of non-directed movement on children with disabilities," she said, as if beginning a lecture. "And today is the first day of group-level testing." Nathaniel blinked, trying to keep up. "I thought this was just a community dance class." Ava, stepping out of the classroom, smiled. "Freedom Steps is a motor rehabilitation program based on the neuropsychological theory of movement autonomy, a blend of adaptive dance and science." He looked at her. "Then why are you still waitressing?" Ava answered instantly. "Because we aren't funded. Because you rejected 3 research proposals." Nathaniel's expression shifted from defensive to guilty. "So that night at the restaurant was all of it staged?" "No," Ava said. "Jaden chose to stand. I chose to follow." Then she lowered her head slightly and looked him straight in the eye. "And now you're the one choosing whether or not to walk beside your son." The small classroom buzzed with odd noise, not from talking but from movement. Uneven footsteps, the squeaking of wheels. Soft music is playing from a speaker in the corner. Children moved using all kinds of aids, walkers, prosthetic legs, arm braces, wheelchairs, each moving in their way. No synchronized counting, no commands. It looks chaotic, Nathaniel murmured, eyes fixed on Jaden, who was awkwardly getting used to the floor, his face tense but not afraid. It's structured, Ava replied calmly. Just not the kind you're used to. Nathaniel didn't respond, but his chest tightened. For 2 years, he had never seen his son try anything independently, and never seen him act without adult direction until today. Ava walked closer to Jaden. She didn't touch him, just whispered something Nathaniel couldn't hear. Jaden nodded. Then I slowly joined the group. A boy with a prosthetic leg was creating his sequence of movements, and Jaden began to follow. Not perfectly, but enough to feel that he wasn't alone. Nathaniel didn't look away. And then what he least expected happened. A group of reporters pushed open the door. Microphones, cameras, lenses pointing in every direction. The entire room froze. Nathaniel shot to his feet. "What is this?" His voice dropped, ready to ban filming. Ava stepped forward, her expression calm, as if she'd already anticipated his every reaction. "We released the preliminary research results this morning and invited the media to witness a live class." Nathaniel turned toward Dr. Hill, who was now greeting the press, and felt utterly betrayed. "You're using my son for publicity." His voice was low, but seething with contained anger. Ava didn't blink. "No one's using anyone. Jaden chose to come here. As for me, I chose the timing. So you'd finally witness what you've rejected 3 times. He was speechless. Not because her words were insolent, but because they were true. 3 times. 3 full proposals. 3 times he hadn't read past the first page. Because he assumed they were emotional concepts from low-level women. And now they were making headlines with his son in the center. "You planned all of this since the night at the restaurant?" Nathaniel asked, his voice hoarse. Ava shook her head. "I couldn't script the look in Jaden's eyes when he stood. But I could choose to follow it and not waste the chance to prove what I and hundreds of children have known for years. That recovery isn't forced, it's released." Dr. Hill handed Nathaniel a printed copy of the newly published article, "Revolutionary Method in Motor Rehabilitation, from Structure to Autonomy." On page 2 was a photograph of Ava dancing with a group of children. No braces, no instructors, just music freedom and the shining eyes of kids who had never been cast as leads. Nathaniel didn't look at the photo, he only looked at Ava. At that moment, she was no longer the waitress he had once dismissed, but a woman with vision, a plan, and a conviction strong enough not to need power to win. Just then, Zoe or Imani rushed in, breathless. "Ava, Jaden, you have to see this." They hurried back into the classroom. The group of children had fallen completely still. The music had stopped. Everyone was watching a scene no one had expected. Standing in the middle of the room, Jaden was unstrapping one of his leg braces. His hands trembled, but no one intervened. No one shouted. Ava started to move, but Dr. Hill raised her hand. "Wait, he's trying something." Jaden took a deep breath, a very deep one. Then I placed one foot forward. No brace. No one is holding him. And then he stepped. Not perfect, not far, not steady, but it was a step entirely of his choosing. Inside Nathaniel's mind, all sound vanished. Only the image remained of his son, walking forward without instruction, without direction. And in that moment, all the treatment plans, the teams of specialists, the elite therapies he had once pursued, suddenly felt meaningless. The room seemed frozen in silence. Everyone present, from the children to the reporters, with their lenses still fixed on Jaden, held their breath. No one dared to disturb the moment. There were no claps, no praise, only eyes witnessing something so pure that no language could contain it. And at the edge of the room, Nathaniel Carter, the man once capable of shaking the stock market with a single tweet, stood frozen, his hand gripping the back of a chair as if letting go would make him collapse. In front of him, his son, the child he had tried to protect at all costs, had just proven that what he needed wasn't protection, but faith, the trust to take a step on his own. And the bitter truth was, Ava had been right. No doctor had achieved that. No specialist he had hired in 2 years had reached that deep inside the boy's heart. Only one young black woman, no master's degree, no private practice, no gleaming business card, just presence, and one choice to walk with, not in front of. The crowd began to murmur. A reporter stepped forward, microphone raised. "Mr. Carter, do you have a statement?" Nathaniel turned to Ava, and she said nothing, but her eyes said everything. "This is no longer my story. This moment is yours. What will you do with it?" Every cell in Nathaniel wanted to react defensively. He had trained in crisis management since he was 30. Deflect, delay, let the legal handle it. But not this time, not because of the press, because Jaden was watching him, and that gaze wasn't waiting for a statement. It was waiting for a father. He drew in a deep breath, turned to the press, and spoke. "You want to know how I feel?" His voice trembled slightly, but it wasn't weak. "I feel that I was wrong." The room went still, camera flashes erupted. A man in finance admitting fault on camera was rare. But a man like Nathaniel Carter, once the embodiment of ego, bowing his head in a community center in the Bronx Freedom Steps, submitted 3 research proposals to my foundation. 3 times I rejected them. Not because they lacked merit, but because I never actually read them. I thought I knew everything I needed to help my son. But I forgot the most crucial part, learning to listen. Ava stood in silence. She didn't cry. She didn't smile. But her gaze was full of acknowledgement, not for Nathaniel's words, but for the choice he had just made. Nathaniel turned back to the cameras. "Starting today, the Carter Foundation will fully fund Freedom Steps for at least 5 years. In addition, we will build an independent rehabilitation center modeled after this program to be expanded nationwide." Then he paused, voice lower, more deliberate. "With one condition, Ava Thompson and her team retain full authority. No oversight, no interference from any organization, including me." A collective gasp rang out. Zoe, or rather Imani, whispered as if she couldn't believe her ears. Reporters surged forward firing questions, but Nathaniel didn't hear them. He was watching Jaden, who was now speaking to a boy in a wheelchair, holding his hand, both chuckling. In that moment, Nathaniel understood. He had built all the wealth, fame, and power to protect his son, had become a cage. Today, his son opened the door and walked out. 3 months passed. The lot that had once been an empty patch of dirt in the North Bronx now echoed with bulldozers, construction workers, and children's laughter drifting from the old community center across the street. The Freedom Steps project officially broke ground. It wasn't a glamorous complex. It didn't chase sleek designs to enhance corporate image like many other Carter Foundation buildings. This time, every brick and every walkway was reviewed by the people who had once crawled over steps too tall, squeezed through hallways too narrow, or were forgotten in unlit corners no one cared about. Ava called it design by lived experience, and Nathaniel sat quietly taking notes like a diligent student, finally learning to understand instead of prove. He no longer stood on podiums, no longer held the mic. Instead, he often sat at the end of the conference table, struggling to read neuroscience papers about neuroplasticity, with dozens of sticky notes scribbled in shaky handwriting. One afternoon, Ava walked in and caught him hunched over a thick binder, his shirt soaked in sweat despite the air conditioning. "I didn't think you'd attend these meetings regularly," she said, surprised. Nathaniel looked up, scratched his head and chuckled softly. "I didn't think I'd be studying neurology at 50. On the table sat an article titled Emotional Activation and Motor Potential Through Unstructured Rhythm of Field Study. Authors P. Hill, A. Thompson. Ava looked at him for a long moment. He was no longer the man who once judged her with a glance at Kingsley. Now he was a father who had learned to step back, a man who once held all the power and was now learning how to peel away each layer of arrogance. "Is this your public redemption arc?" Ava asked, half joking. "Or do you care?" Nathaniel sighed slowly. "Last week, Jaden told me he wanted to remove his second brace." Ava nodded. "I know. He told me first." Nathaniel chuckled. His previous specialist said that wouldn't be possible for another 2 years. Ava didn't need to say anything. She pointed to the photo pinned on the board, Jaden standing on one leg, arms stretched out for balance. No more tension, no more eyes searching for direction. Only himself. "And you let your son try," Ava said softly. Nathaniel nodded. "I fired her the next day." Ava couldn't hide the satisfaction in her eyes. "Because you believed in Jaden." No, Nathaniel replied, pausing. "Because he believed in himself, and I no longer had the right to stand in the way." Outside, the sound of machinery resumed. Jaden and a few other kids were doodling all over a wall, scheduled for demolition, careless, childlike drawings full of life and color. And for the first time in his life, Nathaniel didn't try to understand everything. He let it happen. That afternoon, golden light from the setting sun streamed through a temporary window frame, casting soft rays across an unpolished wooden desk. Ava reviewed the operations plan for the first 3 months, flipping through pages as if they had already been memorized. She didn't need to look to see Nathaniel standing at the door. He habitually tapped 2 fingers lightly against the wood without waiting to be invited in. This time was no different. He didn't sit, didn't speak right away. She waited quietly, not out of pride, but because she had learned that sometimes silence is the only way to make someone face the truth inside themselves. At last, Nathaniel spoke, without looking at her. "Why have you never accepted my apology?" Ava slowly closed the folder. "Because you've never offered one." The answer carried no bitterness, just a plain, unvarnished truth. You funded the program, you changed policies, you protected the project, but you never said, "You were wrong." Nathaniel sat down. For the first time, his posture lacked its usual authority. His back hunched slightly, both hands resting on the table like someone surrendering himself. "I thought I was making amends through action." Ava nodded. "You're making reparations, and that has value. But don't call it an apology." Nathaniel exhaled. His eyes settled on a photo of Jaden dancing with a girl in a wheelchair. Both laughing so freely, it felt like disability didn't exist, nor did the outside world. "So, what do I have to do to be forgiven?" he asked, his voice nearly a whisper. Ava looked at him for a long time. "I'm not waiting for you to do anything. Forgiveness isn't a privilege to negotiate, and I don't need you to carry guilt. I need you to understand that I didn't do this for recognition. I did it for children like Jaden and for people like me who were never given opportunities. And now we're creating our own." She stood, walked to the shelf, and returned with a worn notebook, placing it in front of him. These are lessons I've gathered from the kids at Freedom Steps, Imani, and the times I was rejected. And from you." Nathaniel opened it. On the first page, the words were scribbled in a shaky hand. "Emotions aren't meant to be controlled, but understood." "You don't need to apologize to me," Ava said, stepping toward the door. "But if one day you apologize to Jaden not for trying to control him, but for not believing he could lead on his own, that's when your journey will truly begin." Nathaniel didn't reply. He stared at the notebook in his hands as if for the first time a man who had priced the world was learning to redefine himself. The silver-white ribbon was stretched between two freshly poured concrete pillars. No red carpet, no branded backdrop, no flashy sponsored by signs, only three small italicized words in the bottom corner. Freedom begins with the first step. Children came from across the boroughs, many wearing leg braces, prosthetic arms, and even some who still used alphabet boards to communicate. But no one was seen as a special case. They were kids about to dance. Jaden stood in the center inside the central hall, now entirely redesigned with soft-sprung wooden floors, natural lighting, and high open ceilings. He wore a white t-shirt, blue track pants, a light brace on his left leg and his right leg bare. Beside him were three younger children, a girl in a wheelchair, a boy with a prosthetic leg, and a girl with a stiffened left arm. All were waiting for the music to begin. Nathaniel sat in the back row. He didn't go on stage, didn't make a speech. He hadn't brought an entourage like before. He came simply as a father. And when the music started, an arrangement without defined beats, just open-ended melodies inviting each child to move their way, he saw Jaden step forward. Not fast, not smooth, but each motion carried something Nathaniel had never seen in 2 years of therapy initiative. The boy wasn't being led, he needed no prompting. He was leading his way in his language, and three other children were following. Ava stood quietly in one corner. No applause, none was needed. The silence was strangely beautiful. Imani whispered, "He doesn't need you to hold his hand anymore." Ava nodded gently, "But he still needs you to show up." Nathaniel didn't take his eyes off his son. Inside, he no longer felt victorious, no pride in funding the center or making amends. What he felt was gratitude. "I am grateful for still having the chance to stand here and witness a human being, once just a child in his arms, now guiding others forward." He stepped slowly toward Ava, standing beside her like a man who once knew how to command, now learning to be still. "Thank you," he said softly. Ava tilted her head, eyes still fixed on Jaden. "For what? For teaching me how to walk?" Behind Ava said nothing, but her gaze shone brighter than any formal recognition. A reporter approached, not to question Nathaniel this time, but Jaden. "How does it feel today, leading the first dance at the new center?" The boy thought momentarily, then said, "I'm not leading. We're walking together." He turned to the girl in the wheelchair and nodded. "Everyone has a rhythm. I try not to let anyone fall behind." And Nathaniel understood. There was no speech more potent than that. No apology deeper than learning when to step aside. No greater triumph than accepting that you don't have to be the center of everything. A year later, the Freedom Steps program had expanded to 3 major cities, Chicago, Oakland, and Atlanta. Leading pediatric hospitals began implementing the model of autonomous motor rehabilitation developed by Ava and Dr. Patrice Hill. There were no mirrored studios, no doctors giving commands from raised platforms. Instead, there were open spaces, music without set beats, and children of all physical forms, learning to calibrate their lives at their own pace in their own way. Ava received a national award for innovation in pediatric rehabilitation at a formal ceremony with stage lights applause from ministers and hospital directors. But when she took the stage, Ava said only one sentence: "I wasn't the first to dare do this. I was just the first to not ask for permission." In one corner of the auditorium, Nathaniel Carter sat next to Jaden, now an 11-year-old boy who only used a light cane on days he needed rest. He had just completed his first year in public school without requesting special accommodations and had been chosen to give the welcome speech for new students. But what made Nathaniel proud wasn't the grades nor the media calling his son a face of the new generation. One quiet evening, he asked, "Do you want me to come with you for the school talk?" Jaden replied, "You can sit in the back, Dad. But don't worry, if I fall, I'll get back up myself." Nathaniel had only nodded. He didn't mention the past, didn't bring up the times he had stopped his son from standing just because he feared the pain it might cause. Ava still lived in the Bronx in the same old apartment with Imani. She turned down the offer to become executive director of the organization proposed by the Carter Foundation. "I don't need a glass office," she said. "I need clean floors, music playing, and kids brave enough to stand up." The notebook Ava had once given Nathaniel was now reproduced as a training document and distributed for free to special education teachers nationwide. The first page still preserved the original handwritten words, "Emotions aren't meant to be controlled, but understood." At a community sharing event, a reporter asked Nathaniel Carter, "What is the greatest lesson you've taken from this journey?" He didn't answer right away. He looked over at Jaden, who at that moment was teaching a little girl how to balance with one hand, and then replied slowly that the best leaders aren't always the ones out in front. Sometimes, they're the ones who know when to step back and walk behind someone else. And he believed of all the investments he had ever made in his life, there was one that would yield returns forever, not measured in dollars, not in plaques bearing his name, but in the small, steady footsteps of children once considered weak, now stepping forward to the rhythm of their own making. The story ends there, not with a thunderous ovation, but with a miraculous silence. The silence of those who once lived beneath prejudice. The silence of those who choose action over argument. And that silence was the loudest sound the entire system of privilege had ever been forced to hear.